class for the city's one president. First song is 152. We'll sing some books today, all day. Ralph is out of, what do you know about? You know about heart. I understand. Ralph is out of town. He's traveling, so that's where he's at today. Jeremy had a gout flare up this morning, so he's home with his leg propped up. So Myra's up in the booth taking his place for him. Let's see. We'll get more announcements made the next hour. Herbert has it happened this month, of course, so if we have anything we want to add, see Brother Herbert, he could have an answer for you. That's all I think we can announce right now. We'll get the rest of the next hour. 152 will sing this song. And we'll let Jim, if you don't mind, word a prayer for us. We'll get our Bible place. They're not a friend like the lowly Jesus. No, not one. No, not one. None else to heal all our soul diseases. No, not one. No, not one. Jesus knows all about our struggles. He will guide them the day is done. There's not a friend like the lowly Jesus. No, not one. No, not one. No friend like him is so high and holy. No, not one. No, not one. And yet no friend is so weak and lowly. No, not one. No, not one. Jesus knows all about our struggles. He will guide till the day is done. There's not a friend like the lowly Jesus. No, not one. No, not one. Was there a gift like the Savior in love? No, not one. No, not one. Will he refuse makes a hole in heaven? No, not one. No, not one. Jesus knows all about our struggles. He will guide till the day is done. There's not a friend like the lowly Jesus. No, not one. No, not one. All right, hit that box on top of that set of boxes there. That's your wireless coming through the microphone. They'll come on then. There'll be a button on both of those. Brother Jim.
Our dear Lord and Father above, we are thankful that we have this privilege to come together today. As we begin
We're in the book of Micah this morning. Micah chapter 1, as a matter of fact. And we had marked verse 10, that's where we're going to start this morning anyway. Micah 1, verse 10. The Bible is a fascinating book. And some of it is very interesting to me, some of the figures of speech that is used in inspiration, by inspiration, to get his point across. And in verse 10, beginning, there is a series that we would refer to them as a series of puns. Now, there's a big long word that describes the figure of speech used here. But anyway, it's very interesting how God declares this to these people. Verse 10, he says, Declare ye it not at Goth, weep ye not at all. In the house of Ophrah roll thyself in the dust. And I told you the ESV says, Tell it not in Goth, weep not at all. In Beth Ophrah have I rolled myself in the dust. The judgment is so awful that God does not want it to be announced. Do not give a public display of lamentation. That word Goth is a word that would be equivalent to tail town. Tail town, remember that. And so God says, tell it not where? Tell it not in tail town. And then that word Ophrah is actually for the full effect, you have to get the ASV. Beth Ophrah means house of dust. And so God says, tell it not at the place where it's all told. And also, you'll do what? Do not put dust on your head and make it a lament in the dust town. And so, very interesting. He's not through using those kind of puns yet. He says in verse 11, Pass ye away, thou inhabitant of Sephir, having thy shame naked. The inhabitants of Zanon came not forth in the morning of Bethazel. He shall receive of you his standing. For the inhabitant of Marah waiteth carefully for good, but evil came down from the Lord at the gate of Jerusalem. O thou inhabitant of Lachish, bind the chariot for the swift beast. She is the beginning of the sins of the daughter of Zion. The transgression of Israel were found in thee. Therefore shalt thou give presents to Moresheth-Goth. The house of Action shall be a light of the kings of Israel. Yet will I bring an heir unto thee, O inhabitant of Mareshah. He shall come unto Adullam, the glory of Israel. Now these verses are to be understood in the same light as the previous verse. Desolation, that's the point of all these verses, is desolation is approaching God's people. And pass away, O inhabitant of Zavir, that means fair town. They're going to be fair stripped. They won't be a fair town, they'll be a fair stripped. Pass away naked as captives. The inhabitants of Zanon did not come forth. That's stir town, they did not stir. The well of Bethazel takes your place from you. That would mean the neighbor town replaces you. The inhabitant of Marath is a bitter town, waits for good to come, but only evil is coming from the Lord upon Jerusalem. The inhabitant of Lachish, that means horse town, is to hitch up the chariot with the swiftest horse. And the idea is they will try to flee the coming destruction. And you can't flee God's destruction. The people are to give presents to Moresheth-Goth. Of course, located right near to Goth, the Philistine city. And so the nation would lose this city to the Assyrians, we're told, and make a present to them. And Aksip was a meaning a false town, would be taken over by Israel. It'd be a false possession. They would not really have it. And the last one was Mareshah. Well, the next to last one means heir town. And they would receive an heir, he says. they will see the Assyrian king and his army, and the glory of Israel shall come up even unto Adullam, and that's a word meaning the wild beast cave. In other words, the glory of Israel will be conquered and led away into captivity. And so it's interesting how God uses these different figures of speech to get his point across. Verse 16, make thee bald and poll thee for thy delicate children. Enlarge thy baldness as the eagle, for they are gone into captivity from thee. And he says, you know, go ahead and make yourself bald as the eagle, that is, cut off your hair so as to be like the eagle, and that word really is a word we would use for vulture, not the eagle that you think about. And you remember in the Old Testament especially, shaving one's hair was a sign of extreme mourning. Leviticus chapter 19. And so he tells them to do that on account of the fate of their beloved children, because their children will be taken captive. And so you can go ahead and cut your hair off as a sign of what? As a sign of extreme mourning. And so God is picturing the desolation coming to these people, and it's all because of their sinfulness. Chapter 2, woe to them that devise iniquity and work evil upon their beds. When the morning is light, they practice it, because it is in the power of their hand. So now the picture is going to get pretty graphic. Here is an evil person, and this evil person lies in bed devising evil plans, and the evil plans he's scheming about are ways that he can defraud his neighbor. I heard a preacher say one time, I guess he must have had some young daughters. He said that he went by the room. They was about 2 years old. I guess it was twin girls or a twin daughter or whatever. And he heard her to say, tomorrow I'm going to bite Sally. And tomorrow I'm going to bite Jenny. And so she was making her plans for what? What she was going to do tomorrow that was going to be evil. Well, these people, they spend all their nighttime working out a plan by which they can do what? They can defraud. And you know, we have people in our world today who apparently spend a lot of time doing the very same thing. I don't know, I think everyone in my family has got a text message supposedly from AT&T. It's some number about that long, and AT&T can't even speak English correctly, because we won some great prize or something. If you click on that link, you won some great prize and all of that, and that's just a bunch of foolishness. Somebody is trying to do what? Trying to defraud, trying to scheme. And you know we have to be careful on the telephone. People call wanting their different information and that kind of thing. People are always trying to devise more evil. Well, these people, God says at this time, they're laying in their bed, and they're just trying their best to find some way to defraud their neighbor out of what they have. And what a terrible place that is.
Well, we all, I said we all, I speak for myself, at night you think about sometimes what you're going to do the next day.
Yeah.
I'm not saying we think that evil.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
This is a case of people who are thinking of evil.
That's exactly right.
Thinking of what kind of evil they can do. And we can lay there and think of evil that we can do against our neighbor. Or we can lay there and think about some good things that we might do to help
our fellow man. Yeah.
our fellow man.
Yeah, I understand exactly. And inspiration says these people do it because they have the power to do it. They have the ability to defraud their neighbors. And so with that power, that ability, they're just always wanting more. Going to get more and more and more. And they covet fields, verse 2, and take them by violence, and houses and take them away. So they oppress a man in his house, even a man in his heritage. Well, all they think about is the possessions, the field that their neighbor has. And so all they do all night is plot in their minds how they can acquire them. You remember we have an example of that in the Bible. Ahab wanted the vineyard of Naboth so very bad. And so his evil wife by the name of who? Jezebel. She cooked up this great scheme by which he could do what? He could get that vineyard. Well, God's people, and by the way, Amos prophesied to the northern kingdom a little earlier than Micah's work. We looked at the book of Amos. Israel had the same kind of problem as these people did. Whether it be the northern kingdom or the southern kingdom, they're always plotting to devise more. And most time it was land possessions. And the weak and poor were forced to give their possessions to the strong people of that day. And that's exactly right. That's why it was contrary to God's will for Naboth to sell his land to Ahab. When God divided it up to these people, they were not supposed to sell it. They're supposed to do what with it? Keep it. 1 Kings 21, you can read about that. And so it was to remain in the hands of that man and his generations to follow him. It was remain in that generations to come. And but anyway, these people wanted more and more. And they have the wealth, the ability to devise all these schemes, and they forced their neighbors from their lands and houses. You know, I can think of families that of course I was not old to remember that, but I understand from hearing old folks talk when I was a young boy, there were certain families that I'm aware of where I grew up, that most of their wealth was acquired because they were the store owner, and they would have to buy their livelihood on credit. The crop would fail, and the store owner would become what? Landowner. They put their land up to get their livelihood and plant their crop. The crop don't come through, and then the land was lost. Well, you know, that I guess is your own opinion whether that's ethical or not. But these people were devising all these schemes themselves to concoct by which they could get their neighbors' lands by defrauding them. And so therefore, verse 3, thus saith the Lord, behold, against this family do I devise an evil, from which ye shall not remove your necks, neither shall ye go haughtily, for this time is evil. Well, these people had their plans against the powerless, against the innocent people. God said, I'm going to devise an evil plan against you. And God's plan is going to be such that they will not be able to get themselves out of it. There's no escape. God's plan is certain, and it's also permanent if you think about it. And the haughty demeanor that they had, that's going to be gone. They walk around all pompous because of what they're doing and what the power they possess, but God says, you're going to be debased. You will be humbled. And I am the one who has a plan against you. Look at verse 4. Other people will ridicule the fate of these people. In that day shall one take up a parable against you and lament with a doleful lamentation and say, we be utterly spoiled. He hath changed the portion of my people. How hath he removed it from me? Turning away, he hath divided our fields. He says somebody's going to see the terrible condition of these people that they're facing now, and they're going to take up a parable of lamentation against them. And you think about the person who was so haughty and high-minded about what they were doing, and to be told one day people are going to lament, tell a story, if you will, about your terrible condition. That had to be a shock. We're utterly spoiled. We've lost our inheritance. Our possessions have been gone. They've been taken away from us, and our possessions have been given to the rebellious. And you know, it seems to be one common feature of man, no matter what our position. They just will not be able to understand why God would treat them so. And you know, even talking about the judgment to come, there are a lot of people who are under the idea of that same kind of thinking because they just can't understand and fathom how a loving God could punish people. Is that not right? Don't you hear that a lot about the awful, loving, powerful God and how God that was so loving could punish people? Well, these people are going to cry the same. How could God treat them so? Well, the fact is, what have they done? You know, the thing about it is, there's going to be two different kind of rewards. There's a reward for the righteous, but friend, there's also a reward for the unrighteous. The reward remains the same. It is a reward. It's what's been earned, if you will, by your behavior. These people, I don't know. I guess they were just, some people are just willfully ignorant. They just don't want to admit what they've done, what they've been guilty of. But God's recompense is always just. And the recompense of these people is just. They are getting what they deserve based on their actions. Therefore, verse 5, thou shalt have none that shall cast a cord by lot in the congregation of the Lord. Not anyone left even cast a lot or measure inheritance for them. Casting lots or measuring, that all indicates this dividing an inheritance. Nobody's going to be left to divide what? The inheritance. They're all going to be what? When Israel entered into Canaan, the land was divided by what? By lot. That's exactly right. And when they were able, the rich men conspired, and they had devised all these schemes to take land away from their neighbors, and now their possessions will be taken away by the enemies. And they will be cast off, their inheritance will be gone. Prophesy ye not, say they to them that prophesy, they shall not prophesy to them, that they shall not take shame. Well, the wicked people he's talking about, they tried to put the true prophets of God to silence. That is, they did not want to hear what they had to say. Ahab did not want to hear what Micaiah had to say. He accused the prophet of hating him. That's always the case. And so they say, prophesy ye not. They prophesied, telling the true prophets not to prophesy. That's what he's saying. In other words,
people really don't want to know what God said and says in His Word.
That's exactly right. Leave us alone and let us do what we want to do. Yes. We don't want to hear about that.
But when it comes down to reaping the rewards, then the grind stops.
That's exactly right. Sounds like modern day Americans to me. All you gospel preachers, all you Christian people, just be quiet. Just be quiet. We don't want to hear that. So, those people, they reserve the right to preach their message loud and clear. But they don't want us as Christians to preach our message loud and clear. And that's what's happening here. Prophesy not. We'll do the prophesying around here. That's what's happening. Let us alone. Verse 7. O thou that art named the house of Jacob, is the Spirit of the Lord straitened? Are these his doings? Do not my words do good to him that walketh uprightly? Well, the prophet asks, is the Spirit of the Lord straitened so much he can no longer even has a voice? He addresses the house of Jacob. These people claim to be God's chosen people. But what does that mean to them any longer? Is God content to allow these people just to do what they want to do just because they wear his name? And are the words Micah is giving these people, are they from God or not? And are they not intended for your good and not for your hurt? You know, that's the mistake that people make all around the world. People who teach God's word, they believe, are trying to cause them harm. That's why Paul asked Galatians 4 verse 16, am I therefore become your enemy because I tell you the truth? That's what they think. They think that God's prophet is an evil person, is the enemy because he dares to do what? And he says, is the Spirit of God, is it straitened that it cannot speak any longer? No. Even of late, my people is risen up as an enemy. You pull off the robe with the garment from them that pass by securely, as men averse to war. The very people who claim to be God's people have actually become God's enemy. And instead of following his will, they do what they want to do. And if it means hurting innocent people, so be it. We'll do what we want to do. Their crime, he says, included stripping a man of his robe as he passed by. A traveler traveling down the road who means no one no harm, and a person sees, I have opportunity and the ability, so I'll take what he has. I'll even take the robe off his back. The outer garment, what we're talking about there. You know, Christian people try to live uprightly, righteous lives. We're opposed to all the different evils of life. And even though we're opposed to it and try to live righteous lives, sometimes we have to suffer the very evil that we're opposed to. Is that not right? You know, you might have been taught and taught your people and all people everywhere all your life that a person should not steal, but it may be that you have to suffer somebody stealing from you. You're a Christian, you're living righteously, but you live in the world. That's exactly right. And if you go back and you look at the course of history, you will find that some of the most heinous, violent crimes have been perpetrated in the name of some religion. How did the Catholic religion spread for many, many years? By force, by violence. That's exactly right. Let's go back and look at history. And so, that's exactly right. All right, look at verse 9. The women of my people have you cast out from their pleasant houses. From their children have you taken away my glory forever. I even had the women and children evicted from their homes. The land of Canaan that God gave his people, it was intended to be what? A land of rest, a land of plenty. You know, that's a place where what? Yeah, milk and honey, a land of plenty, a land of rest. But these wicked people, they had violated all the precepts about mercy and justice and righteousness. And because they had done that, their wicked ways are now the source of their own destruction. And there was no concern on the part of these people for their victims. And I would imagine that they did like many do today. They rationalize their own actions in their own consciences. But friend, God will not hold a person guiltless who does not show mercy and practice it. Arise ye and depart, for this is not your rest. Because it is polluted, it shall destroy you, even with a sore destruction. God addresses these merciless men now, and he orders them out of his land. This land was to be a land of rest. You polluted it, and now it will be the means of your own destruction, and the destruction is going to be severe. You know, God is powerful, and God is so powerful that he can turn a person's blessings into a curse. If a man walking in the spirit and falsehood do lie, say, I will prophesy to thee of wine and of strong drink, he shall even be the prophet of this people. Well, there were a lot of people, apparently, who were perfectly willing to give all these evil men exactly what they wanted. You know, the kind of prophet who would just give men, evil men, what they wanted, all he is the mere hireling. You know, we talk about politicians as people who can take any position to match the company he's keeping. He can be on that side, he can be on this side, he can be in the middle, just depends on what his surroundings are. Well, a prophet who's like that, he ain't much of a prophet. He's just a mere hireling, that's what he's telling them. And, you know, that politician who said, I have good friends on both sides of this matter, and I always stick with my friends. Well, that's the way these people were. That's what he says.
That means you stand for nothing.
You stand for nothing. That's exactly right. Jesus said, he that is not with me is against me. And he that gathereth not with me scattereth abroad. Matthew 12, verse 30. Now again, he's going to speak of some better times. Verse 12, he says, I will surely assemble, O Jacob, all of thee. I will surely gather the remnant of Israel. I'll put them together as the sheep of Basra. As the flock in the midst of their fold, they shall make great noise by reason of the multitude of men. Now, despite the great judgment that is just about to descend upon these rebellious people, Micah still holds out hope of salvation for a remnant of God's people. He says God would assemble the people again. God will deliver a remnant of the faithful. And the time is going to come when God would bring back these people from their land of captivity. And those who desired to come back would be allowed to come back. But the desire was not only to return to the land of Canaan, it was also to return back to the Lord. And we talked about Cyrus, 536 BC, made that decree and allowed the people to go back to their homeland. He said, I would gather them as the shepherds of Basra, a place noted for its large flocks of sheep. And, you know, if you apply this on into the Christian age, the remnant very well may also have reference to the relative small number of people who obey the gospel of Christ. We don't know the exact number, but Jesus said, few there be that find it, that way of righteousness. And so, but God has always had a remnant of people. And through the course of the Bible and all these prophetic books we're reading about, we're still talking time after time about God says, I'm going to have a remnant left. They're going to be faithful. They'll go off into captivity, but I'm going to bring them back out one of these days. The number's not great. It's a remnant of people, but God has always had a remnant. Verse 13. the breaker is come up before them. They have broken up and have passed through the gate, and are gone out by it, and their king shall pass before them, and the Lord on the head of them. Well, the breaker is the one who would break in pieces. Seems to be that he's talking about the invaders who would break up the nation of Israel. They would carry the survivors off into captivity. The last part of that verse seems to me to clearly speak about the gospel age. The king and their king shall pass before them, and the Lord on the head of them. The king would, of course, be Christ. Christ would be their guide. Christ would be their head. For the husband is the head of the wife, even as Christ is the head of the church, Ephesians 5:23. He's the head of the body, the church, Colossians 1 verse 18. And the only king that the Israelites would ever have after Babylonian captivity would be who? The Christ. It's exactly right. And the only way they could have Christ as their king after captivity is if they did what? Obey the gospel. That's exactly right. That earthly monarchy, when they were in Babylonian captivity, it was destroyed. And no other king was ever allowed with the Lord again. They could have a king in the gospel age when they obeyed the gospel. And you know, we today, you and I, we have a king. We've obeyed the gospel. And so we have a king. And our king will one day, he'll put down all his rules and all his authority and all of his power. Going to give it all back to God. So that seems to be a reference to the gospel age there. Look at verse 1 of chapter 3. And I said, hear, I pray you, O heads of Jacob, and you princes of the house of Israel. Is it not for you to know judgment? Well, that, of course, is a rhetorical question. Is it not your responsibility as leaders to understand justice? He's telling them, if you will, that you people who are supposed to be dispensing justice, you don't even know what justice really is. Look at verse 2 and 3. Who hate the good and love the evil, who pluck off their skin from off them, and their flesh from off their bones, who also eat the flesh of my people, and flay their skin from off them. And they break their bones and chop them in pieces, as for the pot, and his flesh within the cauldron. Micah says, these leaders, you hate what's good, and you love what is evil. You turn right into wrong by flaying the skins from the bodies of your people. And through the miscarriage of justice, you're then able to sell all their possessions. I tell you, these people were evil, wicked people. He accuses these, if you notice that, of filleting these people and eating their subjects, he says. That's how destructive these people were. Extreme affliction. These poor people suffering all of this great evil at the hand of what was supposed to be their leaders, their rulers. Then shall they cry to the Lord, but he will not hear them. He'll even hide his face from them at that time, as they have behaved themselves ill in their doings. Judgment going to come, and these wicked rulers will cry for help. They'll be crying for the mercy to come from God. But the Lord says, I will not hear your pitiful pleas. It's almost a guarantee that they had turned deaf ears on the cries of their victims. And friend, there is There are some immutable laws in the Bible, and one is this: a person always reaps what he sows. James 2 verse 13 says, for he shall have judgment without mercy, and they showed no mercy. If you don't show any mercy, guess what you're going to have? That's the same judgment you'll have, without mercy. God says, you'll be crying out to me in this terrible time, but I'm not going to hear your cries. You've not heard the cries of all those oppressed poor people that you've defrauded and tortured and killed and filleted and cut up to pieces. You didn't hear their cries. And I'll not hear your cries. I'll cut my ear off from you. I'll hide my face from you. Well, beginning in verse 5, Micah is going to denounce the false prophets of his day. We're going to mark that verse, and we'll get there Wednesday night. We'll find out these false prophets, they cry peace. False prophets always seem to be crying peace, but he says there is no peace. Thank you for your attention. We'll get there Wednesday night. Micah 3 verse 5.